'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking
From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be exploring the psychopath next door. That's right, we have with us Dr. James Fallon. He wrote the wonderful book, The Psychopath Inside, a neuroscientist's personal journey into the dark side of the brain. Dr. Fallon is a professor of psychiatry and human behavior at the University of California, Irvine. He's also an award-winning neuroscientist at the University of California, Irvine as well. So let's welcome him to the circle. Dr. Fallon, welcome to the circle, sir.
Carl, it's good to be here.
Excellent. This is a fascinating topic we continue to discuss. It seems everywhere in the media there's always some mention of a psychopath. But the first thing I want to get out of the way, so people understand and get a real reality check, is 90% of the population a psychopath? Or is it 1%? What is going on here?
About 1% would be categorical psychopaths. That is, if you add up all of the traits that are associated with psychopaths, they get a score that's an arbitrary score, but it's on the Robert Hare test, which goes from 0 to 40. It's like 28 to 30 or above. That would be a categorical psychopath. But there are people all over who have traits. They may score a 5 or a 10. Many people call 0. They have no psychopathy at all. So it's not like we all have it, but a lot of people are, borderline or near that. So it's on a spectrum.
Interesting. Well, there you go. Because I know that sometimes we have this, what do they call it? In behavioral economics, they call it availability bias, I think. The more you see it over and over again, you think everybody's a psychopath. So, okay, we got that cleared up. Now, the neat thing about your book, we've had other professors on talking about psychopathy, and one of the things that I liked about yours is you took a different angle. You looked at the neurological side of it. So I guess the first question is, are there any neurological differences between a psychopath and a non-psychopath?
Well, there are more psychiatric traits than neurological, but it's brain, so we'll say it's neurological.
All right.
We'll put those together. And there are these various traits that almost everybody can agree on, most psychologists and psychiatrists, even though there's no official thing that's accepted as a psychopath or a sociopath. The term sociopath was gotten rid of in 1968. But the traits are there, and the question is, how do you put together the traits to come up with something that's unique and different than other personality disorders or other sorts of neurological disorders. And so that's where the argument is. But the traits that are involved are accepted as being real traits, and they're personality traits to an extreme. Okay, so we all have a sense of empathy, but the type of empathy we have is different between us, right? And so what most people want in a personal relationship, a mate, family, their extended family, they want what's called emotional empathy. When they're feeling what other people are feeling. They know what you're feeling, and they feel it inside themselves. That's called emotional empathy. The other kind of empathy, and it's broken down several ways, but these two breakdowns are very useful, is called cognitive empathy. And psychopaths can have cognitive empathy. That is, they know what you're feeling. They don't feel it themselves. And of course, they can use this against you. It's not like they don't understand what it is, but does not resonate. So it doesn't really mean anything to them. They understand it, though. But people with cognitive empathy, not psychopaths, but anybody who has this, maybe somebody who does a lot of charity work. They love all the children of the world. They want to save the world. And those kinds of people, like Gandhi and Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, people like that certainly had cognitive empathy, but if you listen to their family and books written by their family members, you didn't want to be close to them. If you listen to Nelson Mandela's daughter talking during the memorial, it's basically he's a great man, he was, but you don't want to be his daughter. And the idea is not that he's abusive, but he's maybe not connecting. Well, the thing that people miss is that emotional empathy, but that same person can really care about the world, and it's those people that they can do great works.
Yeah, he did a lot of great stuff.
A lot of great stuff, and these are people we really admire, but you don't usually get everything. A lot of these things are based on genetics, and when you get one set of genetics, you get a whole set of these traits, but they're usually What you don't get are things that are also desirable. You get one or the other, and I'll just give you an example. There's one growth factor in the brain. It's called BDNF. One form of BDNF, if you get that, gives you a great memory. People with have a great memory, but they also have a lot of anxiety. People with the other form of this, the other allele combination of BDNF, they have really kind of crummy memories. It's not so good, but they're really mellow. These are the people that you might think are like stoned all the time. They're not stoned. They're just mellow. They don't care. I forgot to do that. It's like come see, come sa. And so, it's a normal thing, right? So a lot of these things are normal. But if you take somebody, the key trait is this lack of emotional empathy for a psychopath, and you put it in with other traits, which is a very extreme amount of manipulation. So they're cunning, they're manipulating, they're kind of always on the make. Not necessarily to kill you or have sex with you or take your money, but they want you in their world. It's the big con. So it's a con artist, right? And so the con artist but they're con artists. If you're a salesman, you're supposed to be manipulative. Everybody knows that. So if it's in the context of your job, it doesn't count as psychopathy because everybody knows. You say, "Oh, that salesman, he exaggerated to me." That terrible. Well, come on, you're in the world. So a lot of these things don't count because it's just really part of what you do, and everybody's supposed to know this if you've been on the planet at all. But if you're a minister and you have that and you're manipulative and it's a con, well, imagine being that where you're a religious person. And do that. Well, you could say to yourself, I'm doing it for their own good. Then it becomes questionable. I'm not telling you the truth. I'm manipulating you, but I'm going to do it for your own good. This is where the slope gets slippery, right?
Well, let me ask you a quick question here. I hate to break your train of thought.
No,
and you're entering the danger zone now. But so, do they rationalize it?
Sure.
And are they getting something out of it?
One could rationalize it. And in fact, to a psychopath, they don't care. They simply don't care if they're rationalizing it. It's just part of the con. It wouldn't. The idea of feeling embarrassed or getting stress under lying or manipulating, they don't get it. They don't do that. So to ask them that, it's just they kind of laugh inside because it's not part of it. Once you start feeling bad for what you do, if you feel that your moral reasoning says I'm not going to do this, but I want to get that from that person, that's not psychopathy. A psychopath really doesn't care. And they will do all those manipulations, and it doesn't register as a moral issue at all.
I'm thinking Jim Jones here.
Well, yeah. The thing is, there are a lot of people who seem to have it. Now, he seemed to be a psychopath, and he's got a lot of the traits. But unless you really test them psychiatrically, it's very difficult to say, because that part that's a game, that part that they really believe, that takes some while to analyze. So it's easy to say that person's a psychopath and that person's a psychopath, but sometimes they have other disorders, right, and other sorts of motivations, and that's not psychopathy. If you look at some of the dictators, they have, some of them have what is called intermittent explosive disorder.
Oh, yeah.
And people who you think are psychopaths, they have that. All of a sudden they go on a wild rampage. That's not psychopathy. Also, people might say, well, the psychopaths they've seen, maybe in TV and film, are always sadistic and bloodthirsty. And sadism has almost nothing to do with psychopathy. Many psychopaths are not sadistic at all. But we think that, we think that is. So it's not sadism. Because sadism is its own thing. And there's a brain circuit that's associated with that. Okay, so if you go to this lack of remorse, lack of moral reasoning, you don't care about other people, you look at other people as objects, completely as objects to use for your own fun or for your own use. And that's really how they are. Now, you probably know people who do that all the time.
I got a couple popped in my head.
Yeah, but they may not have all the traits to be a full-blown psychopath, but they may have psychopathic traits. Well, I'll give you another one. Yeah. See, there are these. There's this second factor. There's two main factors for psychopathy. One is factor one. One is factor two. And a lot of people are familiar with the Robert Hare test, and that was mostly designed to test criminals. adult adolescent criminals, and first males and then females. That's a criminal population. If you look at the original view of psychopathy from Cleckley, who wrote a book on it in the 1940s and kept revising it, that's more than was done in a psychiatric population. And there's less of this emphasis on criminality and antisocial behavior. So that those are factor 2 traits. And it's called impulsive antisociality and this sort of aggressive narcissism. It used to be malignant narcissism. And those are really negative traits that are associated as antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, a lot in common with those, and also criminality. But the factor 1, those traits are more what are called the prosocial traits. Now, prosocial psychopath, and those traits, they're prosocial in that they allow people to navigate through society. It's adaptive. It's a positive adaptive thing, so they can manipulate their way through society without seeming or being pernicious, without being evil per se. But it also is prosocial because there's a lot of charm involved. And so this charming sort of aspect to it, and charisma, somebody that walks into the room and they got that light around them.
Yes.
Well, some of those people are psychopaths. But the thing is, and here's a key thing. If you look at the average voter, right? The average voter looks at that trait. It's called fearless dominance. Now, fearless dominance is the first trait in one of the psychopathy tests called the PPI, Psychopathy Personality Inventory. That's used in the normal population, not just criminals. And fearless dominance is that swagger. That person walks into the room, they get the light around, they're confident, they're glib. How you doing, man? Great to see you. And they're so studied that they may not be slick. When I said that, how you doing, man? It's like, give me five, all that stuff. They are better than that. You like them. And so people tend to like them. Charlie Manson has this, and even people, when they look at when he seems a little bit charming, that's it. It's called fearless dominance, and they're fearless, and they can dominate. They're always looking to dominate the person they're with, or the group they're with.
Would you say Putin has that characteristic, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking of him.
Yeah, sure. He has that, and he's got the whole macho thing going. But that in a way he's like a throwback to 18th century Tsarist Russia. Where they always had the Tsar's police, and they all had that. And because because of the sort of long history in Russia of being beaten down all the time as a society, they had this learned helplessness as a group, and they seem to like that kind of leader more than other people do, because he's the guy that's going to fight for you. He's the guy that's going to knock down Genghis Khan. He's going to fight for you, and we like him. We like that he's virile. Probably has sex with a lot of women. He can beat people down. Some societies like that because they really feel abused as a society, right? So they like these tough guys that are in our society, which is more genteel, Western European and American, North American society. It's more genteel. That's got to be for us to accept it. Has to be tempered. But the presidents of the United States who have this, if you look at them, the high level of the psychopathic trait called fearless dominance. Not full psychopathy, just that trait. Teddy Roosevelt right at the top.
Oh, yeah.
FDR,
right.
JFK, and the people who we consider leaders. So people that it's correlated with leadership. So the people we vote for tend to have this high level of psychopathy. So we're selecting out psychopathic leaders.
I was getting ready to ask.
Yeah, so in a way, it's a good thing. It's pro-social. But when they act, they go overboard on it. Then we don't like it all of a sudden. When they lie and we don't like it. We like when they lie to save us, but we don't like it when they lie and it harms us.
Hello, my name's Matt, and I'm an addict.
My mom was addicted to prescription pills when I was very young, before I even turned 1.
Are you or someone you know struggling with alcohol or drug addiction? Has everyone given up on you or your loved one? The caring staff at Elite Care understands and treats you as a whole person. We offer individual and group therapy, holistic healing such as yoga, nutrition, and spirituality, medication management, and PTSD treatment. By building upon your strengths and rebuilding broken bonds, we help you begin a successful life. With our staff of licensed psychotherapists and doctors, you can be assured of the highest level of care. Elite care is the best option for long-term rehabilitation from drugs and alcohol. Contact 888-511-0607 for more information.
Let me ask you this. That's an interesting concept, and I didn't know we were heading this way, the danger zone again. What are we looking for when we vote for these people? Because they have the fearless dominance. Are we looking because we want that trait ourselves, or is it because of a paternalistic kind of...
Well, it depends on the personality type, probably, the person, of the voter. And most people, if you look at it, Myers-Briggs
Sure.
type. Okay, well, in Myers-Briggs terms, most people are these SPs and SJs. And those people tend to like the swagger and the tough guys. SPs are the kind of people who work with their hands, athletes, things like that. They can appreciate a tough guy and that kind of leadership. They want Pete Carroll up until the last game. They want Pete Carroll there, who's a tough guy but is smooth enough and everything, and so most people like that. People who are for this Myers-Briggs type of analysis, because it's accessible, right? Myers-Briggs accessible. Regular personality theory has got everybody scratching their heads. But it's useful for this. So people who are intuitive thinkers, the NT people, people like you and me, we tend not to fall for that. We want a thinker. We want an intellectual. We want somebody who's fair and everything. And that's the libertarian streak in people. And they tend not to vote for these pretty boys or these people who have all this charm. And even though it's BS in part, people who are intuitive, thinkers are not impressed by it, and they don't vote for that type of people. So they're in other parties, for example.
Fascinating.
Yeah, they're more. Yeah, and the people who are NFs, the touchy feelies, it's whoever seems like he's such a nice guy. He could be my son. He could be my father. He's such a sweet, my brother. And so people fall for these traits, and the ability to project that as a leader, depending on the business you're in, if it's politics. It matters. So you want to be sweet enough, but be tough, and appeal to those other traits, and not necessarily being an intuitive thinker, which is to most people boring. It's it's the scientist, the writer, and everything. It's a ho hum type of person. So those people tend not to be elected. So we choose these bigger than life, oftentimes megalomaniacs. People are narcissistic. It looks like confidence. It's leadership.
Now, is that a main characteristic? Because we're looking at the psychopath in the general population.
That's right.
We've done other shows with the criminals and all that, but so do they have to have that megalomaniac kind of personality in the general population? Is that like one of the main themes?
For a psychopath, it's narcissism. They all have a level of narcissism and what would be a megalomania. They know what's true and good and right. You don't. Very confident of it. There's a type of narcissist who is a narcissist because they don't believe they're all that hot. But there's a narcissist who really believes they're hot. And you want that convincing person. And that trait is more along the psychopathic spectrum, that positive narcissism. It's believable. Because most people can read, if they really care, they can read people. They have tells.
Sure.
And when somebody really believes that they've got the goods, they know what's right, you can tell that they're confident. So at least you know that they're not lying. Doesn't mean they're right, but you know that they're not lying. So people like that. Is
it comorbidity then with narcissism?
Yeah.
Oh, so it definitely goes.
Yeah. There's comorbidity with it.
Interesting. Anything else that plays along with that?
Well, there are many of these with narcissism.
With the psychopathy. Because I know psychopathy is under the DSM.
Right.
It's out of there.
Right.
They kind of have antisocial personality disorder, but it's not really the psychopathy. So is there anything else that...
Well, they're behavioral things. They tend to have a lot of short-term relationships. If somebody's married 4 times, just because you're married 4 times doesn't mean that you're a psychopath. But if you find a psychopath, they have a lot of transient relationships. Now, there are other types that do also. The people who either love you or hate you, they go back and forth, borderline personality types. Right? I mean, those are very dangerous people. And that's a group that also murders at a high rate, but they're not psychopaths, but they share. They're comorbid, like you're saying. And so, but those are the basic traits. Usually, there's a lot of sexual promiscuity in psychopaths.
Are they transient jobs too, right?
Yeah, and transient in jobs and everything. But the ones that are really successful, the ones that are not imprisoned by the time they're teens and early 20s, because a lot of them get caught. But the smart ones who have not been beaten up, they don't have other brain damage and really can navigate and who are smart, they know how to modulate their behavior. They know what people believe and want to believe, and they will modify their behavior very cleverly. So they'll suppress those kind of BS things and just play. They learn what people are thinking. They're very good at reading your mind and your emotions and then mirroring that and playing off it. They're very good at it. The smart ones. The other ones, a lot of full-blown psychopaths are, maybe drug abuse, alcoholics, been beaten up, they got brain damage. They're goofballs. They can't really organize their behavior long enough to hold a job, you see. Oh. So it's not necessarily they can't hold a job, but a lot of them who are psychopaths have these other sorts of damage because of the trouble they've gotten into or because they were beaten as a 2-year-old by their father or uncle or somebody. And so, no one of these things will make you a psychopath. They're the common traits. But so the DSM-4, it's like it's almost like a field guide, like a taxonomic field guide. And you're looking at something flying around. You say it's got wings, right? It's got wings, and it chirps a little bit, makes a noise, and it eats other things, and it flies and everything. It's a bird. And you'd say, well, no, you didn't. There's not enough definition there. It was a moth or a bat, And so there's ways of mixing all these functions in the anatomy with wings and being able to fly and making chirping noises and everything. And you end up with the wrong diagnosis.
A great example.
Yeah, so that's one of the problems is as a taxonomic guide, it can fail. And that's why it's still not accepted as a thing officially in DSM-5.
Now, this one, I know because you did some look at the neurological differences, if I can even talk, the neurological differences of a psychopath. Did you see anything? Was there anything different in the prefrontal cortex? Was there anything different in your amygdala?
The ones, I happened to just come into this by mistake, really, partially by mistake. For years, from the early 90s onward, my colleagues would ask me to look at PET scans, positron emission tomography scans. A lot of people use fMRIs now instead of PET scans. PET scans are a little bit more expensive, but they're primo in terms of the quality, what they can tell you. And they were asking me to look at PET scans, and it turns out that these are like really bad killers, murderers, serial killers, and I was looking at them over the years. But it wasn't until about 2005, 2006 that I got a whole bunch of these. And in looking at all of these murders, I asked the people who sent them to me, don't tell me who they are. Mix them with normal scans, mix them with schizophrenics, depression. So I don't know. As a scientist, you don't want to know, is that, well, here's a murder, tell us what you see. Because even scientists, we like to make up stories. We can't help, we like narratives. The human mind loves a story. And if you know going in what it is, then you make up the story, even if you fight it. It's just something that you fight. And you get into a little magical thinking about things, unless it's done blindly. When I did that, and I analyzed all these over months, a pattern popped out. So even though all of these, the people who were a kind of murderer, they had very similar damage. But they had extra damage. You could tell somebody was hit over the head or something. But if you looked at the common core, what was common to all of them? What they had was their limbic system, their so-called social brain or emotional brain, was turned off. And that's the part of the brain, it makes a big loop in your brain like this from the side. It's called the limbic loop.
I'll show it to you right here. There's a limbic loop there.
Yeah, it's like a C. And it starts out connected to the orbital cortex and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is just the cortex above the eyes. So that part of the prefrontal lobe, it's at the bottom and then toward the midline. And that's the part of the frontal lobe that inhibits behavior. And therefore, we mostly think of morality as things you don't do. To be a moral person, they don't say, do you do good works? For most people, is did you do anything bad? Because we tend to define morality as a good person. Well, they may not do anything. It's kind of an empty thing. It's like being a virgin who doesn't care about sex. But so what? And so, there has to be some skin in the game, so to speak, for it to count. And so, we usually think of morality as inhibiting behavior. But if you look at it more, there's more to it. But in this case, it's inhibiting behavior, and therefore it's associated with morality and moral reasoning. So it's that little, it's that little guy or girl in your head that's going, that's not a nice thing to do, you know, and that's usually associated with this orbital cortex. And then it continues on into this, what's called cingulate cortex, which used to be called the fornicate gyrus for some reason. And that was gotten rid of years ago, except in some medical schools. And that cingulate gyrus is that's the border between your neocortex, kind of your thinking, and cold cognition. All the parts of your cortex connect with it. And then that connects with this emotional brain. So it's the window to the emotional brain. And it kind of is the area that chooses, well, from day to day, as you're looking down at this, you may be looking for an error in your notes or looking for something to focus on. And when you're asking a question, you may be thinking of your own family. And it may be an emotional thing. Well, that's a different part of this cingulate cortex switching around. Okay?
Interesting.
And then that continues into the hippocampal area, where that works with the amygdala for emotional memory. And then the amygdala itself, which is, people would say, it's kind of like your id. It drives, eating, 3 F's. It's what is it? Well, it's fear and feeding and
Food,
sexual
flight.
reproduction. So,
Yeah.
and that's where a number of things occur, but they drive very fundamental behaviors that we need to exist as a person, and as a species. So it's very, very important species-wise. But the thing is, these two areas, this orbital cortex and the amygdala, they inhibit each other. So they're always in a check and balance.
Okay.
So they're supposed to be in balance. It's a yin-yang thing in balance. And then it's in the normal person, the normal person, or the average moral person. That person, under certain circumstances that are socially and morally okay, if you will, they will kill, right? Killing is not an evil thing by itself. If somebody's attacking your child, you're going to kill your child. It's not immoral to kill that person.
Sure.
To defend it. There's a time and a place for everything. And this is like a biblical thing, right? And this is something that goes back thousands of years as knowledge and wisdom, that all these things are, they're neither good nor bad, but they have to be done at the right time. And that's how we define morality. And if you do it by the rules, then we call it ethics. So that balance between the orbital and ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, it allows one to do things at the appropriate time. It's appropriate time to have sex, appropriate time to eat. For me, it's like all day long. But we have an innate knowledge of morality. You don't have to be told growing up that it's immoral to kill your own species, right? And many things, like the innateness of language. It's not things you have to teach. But in people whose orbital cortex never developed in utero or in early life, they have no sense of what morality is. There's almost like a blind person who never saw. There are blind people who lose sight when they're 10 years old, but they remember blue and red. Somebody who loses their orbital cortex, either because of a tremendous amount of genetic suppression of that, or more likely epigenetic suppression, those genes that are associated with these behaviors, when they're locked in for your life because of early abuse or abandonment, from the time of birth for the first 2 or 3 years, a very sensitive time. That's when, your frontal lobe is opened up to the world. And so the social brain, as a child, if you come out and you see love, you'll probably be a loving person when you grow up. And so how your genes may be modified, because you have your genes, but what's turned on and off, that's your epigenome.
Yeah.
And but if you're abused or abandoned, it's a hostile world, and it probably sets your brain, that social brain, in order for your own survival, to be hostile. And you grow up when you're, a teenager or an adult as a very hostile person. So
And psychopaths have that one.
yeah, they have, yeah. And so what they have is almost all of them, and everyone I've ever, studied or looked at, that they all had early abuse or abandonment. And many lost, very early on, one parent and the abuse by the other parent, almost everyone. You got to watch out. Even Ted Bundy's case, once you look deeper, you'll say, I know everything was normal. But when you really look deeper, you see the abuse. And, some aunt will say this and some friend will say that's... but they'll protect each other. You'll protect your tormentor. It's like a Stockholm effect for some of
when
these.
I read his biography, he was... he wasn't that protected at the end, I guess.
No, not at the end. But but they all have this early abuse, and probably, so we don't know for sure because there's not enough been analyzed. So it's still a theory that there's a certain group of genes that are associated with traits, and we kind of know that. But how those are put together and changed by early abuse at a certain time affects a brain pattern of this social brain. It alters it into an abnormal sort of response. And then when a person grows up and all these areas of the brain mature, as right after adolescence, you got a psychopath. But any one of those things is not enough. It's like those three things have to be brought together. The brain pattern, the circuitry, which can be changed in utero. It can be primed in utero. The set of genes that affect these behaviors, and then early abuse or abandonment. It's like a three-legged stool. And those three things happening, interacting early on in life, that seems to be the trigger.
Those are the ones that can create these psychopaths.
Yeah.
Now, now we only got 2 minutes left, but this is the criminal psychopath, or anybody who falls into a psychopathic.
Well, all the psychopaths that have been looked at, criminal and non-criminal, look like they have this basic pattern of the brain, that part of the brain turned off. And they can have other sorts of problems, but there really haven't been a lot of genetic analyses done of these people. So a lot of this is still theory. It's what we can put together, patch together into a theory now. But, not too many people, not too many groups want to spend a whole lot of money finding out about these guys. They want them dead. And so it's hard to really do research, even though it's so important for us to learn for bullying, for the mayhem in our streets, in our society, for terrorists, and that are really becoming important. Seeing what triggers it, because not every kid is vulnerable. There's maybe only a quarter of the kids are genetically vulnerable to this early abuse that will really become a psychopath. Others, they may be angry, more like a sociopath. They're not genetically, essentially, a psychopath, but they may have a chip on their shoulder. Somebody may have abused them, and they're going to get even with the world. And so a lot of people who carry out awful acts may not be psychopaths at all, but they're mad people, and they haven't got along well, and they're getting even with the world. So there's a logic to that. And I think we have to understand this, not just to understand bullying in schools and in the family and what happens in our streets, but it's going to be a big deal in the next 5, 10, 50 years.
I completely agree. I hope you found that as exciting as I did. That was amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Dr. Fallon, for joining us today on The Circle. Here's the book once again, The Psychopath.
Inside.
You definitely want to get the book right here. You can get it. Dr. Fallon, thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, even in the psychopath's mind, we're there. See you next time, everyone.